I'm pretty sure that some of you in this big meeting room are wondering, why should I listen to a presentation about the European Union? Why should I care about what's going on in the EU? Brussels is far away from Sarajevo, and Bosnia-Herzegovina is not a member state of the EU. And you're correct. But even if Bosnia-Herzegovina is not a member state of the EU, it's a candidate country. And you know that acceding to the EU requires that your regulatory framework in Bosnia and Herzegovina aligns slowly but surely with the regulatory framework of the European Union. And that means that ultimately you will have to apply all the rules at European level, including the rules on financial services and the rules on insurance. It means, in practice, that in the future, the vast majority of the laws, the regulation, the legislation, the requirements you will need to apply and comply with in Bosnia and Herzegovina is actually going to be decided in Brussels. It will come from the EU. And like any other EU member state, 80% of your legislation in Bosnia and Herzegovina applicable to insurance is going to come from Brussels. 80%. 8-0. And that includes all very good rules, the one that you're going to like because they're going to make your business easier, because they're going to ensure a level playing field also between the different competitors, because they're going to protect also your consumers. But you'll see there will be also a lot of different rules you will be complaining about, because they will be extremely burdensome to implement and they will be extremely costly for you to apply. Some of these rules could even prevent you from servicing your customer as they wish to be served, and they could slow down your innovation efforts. What I would like to explain to you today is that this journey of compliance with EU regulation is going to be a very long, a very complex, and a very challenging one. I think one of the speakers before me was saying, the sooner the better. And I would echo that message. The sooner you get prepared, the better it is going to be for you. The first challenge that you're going to be facing when it comes to complying with EU regulation is actually the volume of legislation at European level. What you see on this slide is a list of all the different EU legislation that was applicable to insurance in 2008, right? About 10 years later, we got this list of legislation at European level applicable to insurance. What do we get today? This. And it's not only the increase in terms of volume that is interesting, it's also the variety of the policy areas. So you will find legislation on prudential, on solvency, but you will also find legislation on consumer protection, on products like motor, pensions, life, on data, on sustainability, on taxation, on employment, social rights, on distribution, and on new technologies like artificial intelligence. And it's not really over, because there are also a number of different legislations which are being discussed today between the different EU institutions, the European Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, so the member states. And they're discussing a lot of different pieces of regulation that could be relevant to insurance. And that means in practice that tomorrow EU insurers will have to comply with this number of different regulations. And when I say EU insurers, I also include insurers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that will also be your challenge, to be complying with all these different regulations. So you see that the number of regulation in the EU keeps increasing over time, to the extent that in 2008 we had 12 pieces of legislation applicable to insurance. Today we have more than 70 different pieces of regulation applicable to insurance. I would love to tell you that this is done, this is over, but it's not the case. Because what I'm explaining to you now, all the list of regulations you've seen is only the tip of the iceberg of the EU regulatory framework. What we call in the EU jargon the level 1 legislation, so the framework legislation. But beneath the level of the sea, you will find the level 2 legislation, which is there to give details to the level 1 framework legislation, and the level 3 measures from supervisory authorities mostly. And all these can take different types of form. They can be binding rules, they can be soft law, but in the end of the day, you will have to implement all these different pieces of legislation. In the end, that means pages and pages and pages of different requirements. Actually, thousands and thousands of requirements that your companies, that your distributors will need to read, understand, and it's not so easy, to interpret and to apply. So that means also for you, huge burden and a lot of costs that you will need to allocate to this compliance effort. Another challenge coming from the EU and that you will be facing is a number of regulators and supervisors at European level. Just a decade or a bit more than a decade ago, in the European Commission, so our regulator, there was pretty much one service, one Directorate General that was producing legislation relevant to insurance. Today, we have 14 different Directorate Generals. Directorate General is like a ministry. So there's of course the one on financial services, which is doing insurance, but you also have the one on consumer protection, justice, new technologies, employment, health, on taxation, climate, and so on. And they all issue regulation that is one way or another relevant to insurance activities. And then next to that, you have an increase in the number of supervisory authority. Of course, central to that, you have EIOPA, the European Insurance Supervisory Authority, which is sitting in Frankfurt. But you also have now the Systemic Risk Authority. You have the European Central Bank. You have an authority in charge of data protection. You have another one in charge of cybersecurity. A new one, which has just been established in charge of artificial intelligence. And all these different authorities, they're producing supervisory measures that the insurance companies have to abide with. So you see that over time, the European Union has become what I would call a machinery, a factory producing regulation. And again, this is today really a challenge for the European insurance industry. European insurers are struggling to keep pace with all this over-regulation. But very soon, it will also become your challenge. Now, a fair question to ask is whether that trend is going to continue over the future. Can we expect the European Commission and the European institution to continue at the same pace producing European regulation? I'm not entirely sure, actually, because the world is changing. Of course, we got more uncertainty, more instability, more volatility. We got geopolitical tensions with regional conflicts, even a war in Europe. We got the trade barriers and tensions emerging again, thanks to the US President, Mr. Trump, who is reintroducing the tariffs now. We got huge competition when it comes to new technologies and artificial intelligence, and I can tell you that the EU is not at the forefront here. We're lagging behind our friends from the US and from China, and this is raising a lot of questions for the EU in terms of sovereignty. And of course, the EU is still struggling with the protection gap. Pensions, health, but also cyber and climate. And of course, this is pushing the European Commission, first of all, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to rethink. Is regulating everything and all the time the best strategy for the EU? Do we need to change that approach? And the good news is that, of course, they are starting to shift their approach away from regulate everything and more to regulate less but smarter. And the new priorities of the European Commission are now to attract investment, to try and promote the growth in the EU, to reduce the bureaucracy, to cut the red tape, and to simplify the regulatory framework. They also want to work on strengthening the competitiveness of the EU and our resilience, especially vis-à-vis the US and China. And they want to work and develop the digital sovereignty and the defense and security of the EU. So that's a huge change of paradigm for the European Union. Again, moving away from being a technocratic body, regulating absolutely everything, to be a more strategic continent, looking at the priorities to make sure that the EU remains resilient in the future. And where I got good news is that I think the insurance industry has a key role to play in helping the EU achieving these different objectives. Why? Because the insurance industry is the first one to provide protection, financial protection. Can you imagine that the European insurance industry is paying every year in claims and benefits 1 trillion euros? It's 2.8 billion euros paid in claims and benefits every single day in the year to European beneficiaries. We're also master in risk reduction. We know how to prevent and manage risk, and we can help the EU institution, the businesses, and also the citizens in their prevention of risk measures, and to help them also in being more resilient in front of some risk like cyber and climate change. We can also help people to save, to invest, and to plan for old age. I don't know whether you knew that, but 70% of the retail investment market in Europe is actually made of life insurance. And that shows how trustful our products are and how successful we are. We can, of course, help with the growth and the sustainable transition. Insurance companies are one of the first institutional investors across Europe. We have 9.5 trillion euros of assets under management. And most of this money is actually invested within the EU, and that helps with the digital, but also with the green transition very much. We're also long-term investors, so we help with financial stability. And we do also help the EU with being more competitive and being in the leadership across the world. I don't know whether you knew that, but in the top 10 insurance companies, half of them are actually coming from Europe. There's no equivalent in the other financial services, and there's probably no equivalent in the other industries. We can really help the EU to achieve their objective in terms of leadership, investment, growth, resilience, and competitiveness. Another reason why I think you should be caring about what is going on at European level is actually because of the projects that are being discussed today in the EU. Projects that can change the future of the insurance industry, but also the way we interact with our customer, and also how successful our business can be in the future. The first project I would like to mention to you is what we call the Savings and Investment Union. So what Ursula von der Leyen wants to do here is to deepen the capital market, to integrate the capital market. And one of the big measures that the Commission wants to present at the end of this month is the creation of what they call a savings and investment account. The idea is really to try and attract the money from citizens and to channel this money to what they call productive investment. So helping with infrastructure, helping with sustainability projects. And the big question for the industry is who is going to be the provider of this saving and investment account? Are we going to have a role as an insurance industry, or is it a role that is going to be allocated solely to the banks and the asset management industry? I think this is very important for us to get a role there and to explain to our policymakers in Bosnia, like in the EU, the role that we play as long-term investors, but also in attracting the money from the citizen through life insurance. Another big project, which is a game changer for our industry and our customer, is a retail investment strategy. So here, the idea for the Commission is to try and encourage people to invest their money instead of leaving that money sleeping on the banking account. And we know why people do not invest. In general, there are several reasons. They don't have the money, or they want to invest, but they find it simply too tedious. And this is a reality, actually. In the EU, if someone wants to purchase a life insurance with an investment component, it takes up to 2 hours for the advice process. Who has time to spend 2 hours in responding to questions and tests to get access to a life insurance product? And the third reason why people do not invest, which is probably the most important one, is because they're afraid of losing out the money they invest. You know, you take years to try and save some money. You don't want to lose it by investing in the capital market. And this is where, again, I feel the insurance industry and our products can make a huge difference. Our life products are the only products in the market where you have an investment component and a protection. And the protection can be a protection like a financial guarantee on the interest rate, on the capital invested, so exactly what people need to feel reassured they're not going to lose all the money they will invest in the capital market. And our product also have biometric risk coverage against different types of risk, sickness, death, unemployment, and so on. So exactly what the economy and people need to address a protection gap. The question in the future is whether these specific features of insurance are going to be recognized in the regulatory framework that EU institutions will be proposing. And then last but not least, digital. I mean, the Commission has been extremely good at regulating everything that relates to digital in Europe. The last of their regulation is the Artificial Intelligence Act. But the good news is that I think they're moving away again from regulating everything that relates to digital. Now, they're trying to promote the uptake of new technologies and artificial intelligence by the different operators, including the insurance industry, which I think is a very good way forward. But a key question that is being raised now at European level is what about data? Topic that was mentioned by the previous speakers. What about data? The EU says that we've got a wealth of data available in Europe, and we don't make use of it. And I think that's a great opportunity for the insurance industry because the core of our business is about data. We need data to understand the risk, to price the risk, to prevent the risk, to detect fraud, but also to tailor the services and the products to our consumers. We need this data. And data can even help us to push back the limits of insurability. Think about cyber and climate risk, for example. So great opportunity for us. But the problem is that when policymakers think about insurance and data, they don't see the opportunity. What they see is very often the risk. So if insurers get access to more data, it means they will over-individualize the pricing of their product. And the risk there is a risk of discrimination and exclusion of high-risk consumers. How do we deal with that? And then what the Commission is thinking is instead of giving access to insurers to other sectors' data, like the one on telecommunication, mobility, energy, and so on, they're thinking now how they can give access to other sectors and other players in the financial services area and beyond to the data held by the insurance companies. So again, a potential game changer for our industry in the future. I think for me, all these different projects that are in the pipelines, that I call the game changer projects, are showing how difficult it is for our industry to be understood by our policymakers. And this is the case at European level, but I'm pretty sure you're facing the same type of challenges here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Very often when your regulators are thinking about doing regulation, they think about horizontal legislation. So typically in Europe, that was the Artificial Intelligence Act. That was a regulation that was applying to all different sectors, and insurance was just a tiny part of it, which means that de facto regulators, when they draft this regulation, they never think about insurance. So they regulate insurance like all the other sectors without taking into account the specificities of our sector. What we see in Europe is also regulators are working in silos. So as I said, you've got different ministries in Europe, which we call Directorate General, and one of them is going to start working on a regulation. Another one in another Directorate General will work on a different regulation, but they will never speak to each other, never coordinate. So they will do their own work on their side, which at the end means you could have duplicative requirements, or even worse, inconsistent requirements. How do you apply then the regulation when you got requirements that are contradicting each other? Then the biggest challenges that we, I think, facing as an insurance industry is that people don't understand how our business works. What is private insurance? And this is the case for policymakers. They don't understand the complexity and the benefits of our business. And that means very often that they think that if it works for banking or investment, it must be working also for insurance. If it works for social security, then it must be working for insurance because they think it's the same. And as they don't know the business and they don't know all the benefits we're bringing to society and people, every time they think about regulating insurance, they think about addressing the risk of insurance and data, for example. And they completely overlook the benefits for society and for people. Another challenge that we face in our advocacy is a polarization, political polarization. So Europe is surely but becoming a bit like in the US on the political spectrum, meaning it's either black or white, it's yes or no, it's day or night, but there's no middle ground. And this is a huge issue for the insurance industry because our business is a very complex one that requires nuance and that requires also the policymakers to go into the details. So it's a lot of different challenges that we're facing at European level to get the regulatory framework right. And that's not a small challenge, when you see the number of regulations and the importance of the regulation that are being discussed at European level. And all these challenges, again, they are our problem today, but they will be your problem also tomorrow. You know, you may think that I've been a bit critical now about the EU, and that was not my intention, really. I still think that the EU is probably one of the most beautiful projects, very useful project also. I heard recently the French Foreign Affairs Minister saying that the European Union is a form of life insurance protecting European citizens against a changing world and a global disorder. And I think this is all about the EU. It's a life insurance for all of us. And we need to work with that. We know that the EU, even if they're changing their strategic priorities, they're going to continue legislating, and the legislation will continue having an impact on our business model. So I would really call you to get ready for that. I call you to be forward-looking. Sooner is better. Get prepared already today for tomorrow's compliance and tomorrow's challenging. It's going to come much quicker than what you think. Join forces. You're stronger together. You've got a fantastic team here in the association in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Work with them, join forces, put your messages together, and speak with a single voice with Ermin. And engage now with your policymakers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They will have a seat also in the future at the EU table. So you need to engage with them and explain to them what is insurance. No one else is going to do it for you. You have to do it. And you need to educate them and raise their awareness about the benefits of our sector for the economy, for the society, and for people. Insurance is, I believe, the best asset that Europe has to work on its growth, its resilience, its economy, and its prosperity. And we need to convey that message across to our policymakers in Bosnia and in Europe. Insurance matters, really. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, I wish you a very, very, very happy Insurance Days in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Molim vas, još jedan veliki aplauz za gospodina Vidonju. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have questions for you, but I'm sure they will be asking during the lunch or maybe coffee break.
With pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.